Hello everyone, Ben DiBono here to discuss with you the second half of question 5 in the Summa Theologica on goodness in general. This is going to cover articles 4 through 6 and wrap up that question for us. As always, you will find in the video description a link to the outline of this question, a link to the Summa as a whole, and a link to the Summa Theological Dictionary. I am expanding. We have a few new terms this time, which will be covered both in the outline for this question and in this video. But be aware that as we move forward, that dictionary does expand, so keep your eye on that, especially if you come across old terms that I've used in previous videos. Like I've said before, I'm not going to re-explain them, so refer to that and to previous videos for anything that seems maybe a little confusing or odd or whatever. Anyway, let's not waste any more time. Let's get over to the video capture and start discussing articles 4 through 6 of question 5. Let's go. Alright, as you can see, I'm going to try and do things just a little bit differently to make this part of the video a bit more interesting. Hopefully you don't get distracted by my messy office behind me, but hopefully this will work well and make this part of the video just a bit more engaging and personal rather than just seeing a screen of text. Anyway, Prima, a treatise on the one God. I do have it on my to-do list to go ahead and add the other treatises in here, both for Prima and the other parts, so that we have those set to go and you can kind of see the whole outline of the Summa, even in parts we won't get to for many months. Alright, we are in How God Exists, the Divine Essence. Almost done with the second part of His essence, the perfection of God. We got this video, and then the next one will cover question 6 in its entirety. Okay, we did articles 1 through 3 last time. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, we do have some definitions to cover. Aspect, mode, species, and order. Let's talk about aspect first. I mean, this is probably a pretty basic definition. I don't know. It's not a difficult term to understand. It's probably one where we don't necessarily need a definition, but for me, when I'm reading this stuff, it's just you get so overwhelmed by some of the philosophical terms. So even one that's maybe a little easier to understand like that, it's helpful to have that definition there. So aspect just means a feature of something, and we'll cover these other 3 here in just a moment. So let's open up Article 4, which, as you can see, whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause. In other words, is the final cause, and this goes back to Aristotle's 4 causes, which is something you might want to refer to previous definitions about or do some Googling on. Not a difficult thing to understand, but we're talking about the efficient cause, material cause, formal cause, and the final cause. So at least have a basic comprehension of those for these sections of the Summa. So, is the final cause a feature or an aspect of goodness? Well, let's take a look at our objections. Our old pal Dionysius leads off these first 2 objections. Dionysius is going to tell us that goodness is praised as beauty. In other words, goodness is beauty. Beauty is part of the formal cause. That would be saying that it's part of its form, it's part of its substance to be beautiful, not the final cause. Dionysius also tells us that goodness is the thing by which other things subsist and are, which, to put it in short form, is self-diffusive. That places it within the efficient cause. In other words, goodness, and this is especially true since we've identified goodness and being as, at least on some level, being synonymous, goodness is that by which other things exist. So, because goodness is being, nothing exists without being, that makes it part of the efficient cause, according to that objection. And then finally, Augustine is going to tell us that we exist because God is good. Therefore, goodness is part of the efficient cause. The efficient cause, what brings something into being, what causes something. And Augustine says that something is God's goodness, so we place goodness within the efficient cause. Alright, argument from authority. On the contrary, Aristotle tells us that goodness has the aspect of a final cause. So there you go. Let's get a little more from that. Okay, what's the argument here? We saw back in Article 1, we established that goodness is that which is desirable. Okay? Brief tangent here on that. I think it'd be could be confusing to say, well, how do we say that goodness is synonymous with desire, since we can desire bad or sinful things? And I don't know for sure what answer Aquinas would give to that, but I think that we're talking at a base level here. So the base level of your desires. Desire something, and evil is nothing. Remember, we saw that in the last article. So because evil is not a thing, it is the privation of a thing, therefore desire cannot be for the lack of a thing, it must be for a thing in and of itself. So desire, at least at a root cause, and in a philosophical term, is tied to goodness. Experientially, that might not be the way we would understand it pragmatically, but that is what we're talking about when we talk about goodness on a pure philosophical level. Okay, so goodness is that which is desirable. Desirability has the aspect of an end, therefore so does goodness. In other words, when you desire something, you are seeking out an end. It's teleological. Okay, the final cause is that which drives the agent to action. Goodness drives an agent to action. So both in the sense that desirability is teleological, it has the aspect of a final cause, and so does goodness, because it's for finality that something acts. When you do something, you are seeking an end. Therefore, because goodness is what drives an agent to action, it is the final cause. All right, objections answered. Number one, beauty and goodness are the same fundamentally, but they differ logically. Remember, we talked about this, that there's a difference between how things really are and how they logically are. Okay, so we're going back to that distinction. Goodness relates to appetite. In other words, it's part of a desire, which gives it the aspect of a final cause. Goodness is self-diffusive in that it drives an agent to action. Remember, we saw that term self-diffusive up here. It's just kind of a shorthand for this whole thing. Things subsist and be brought into existence. They're self-diffusive, but they're self-diffusive according to goodness, and that goodness is what's driving it to action. And I never filled out number 3, so let's just go and read that straight from the Summa. I'll have that filled out by the time I publish that video. I'll try to be more careful about that. I've done that a couple times now. Alright, so we're in Article 4. Let's just open up our good Summa Theologica here. Reply to Objection 3. He who has a will is said to be good so far as he has a good will, because it is by our will that we employ whatever powers we may have. Hence a man is said to be good not by his good understanding, but by his good will. Now the will relates to the end as to its proper object. Thus the saying, we exist because God is good, has reference to the final cause. You know, I remember typing this out, so I don't know what happened here. I'll have to figure it out. Anyway, here's what that's saying. What he's saying is that when we say that if something has a will, which God does, and that will is good, then that thing is said to be good. So to the extent that something's will is good, you can call that thing good. Now, God having a perfect, holy, good will, we could therefore call holy good. Therefore, Augustine's phrase here, that we exist because God is good, is a shorthand before we exist because God has a good will, and when we put it in terms of the will, we get back to the final cause. Okay, so I'll find out what happened to my writing there, and we'll get that put back in place. Alright, Article 5 then. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Alright, let's go back up to our definitions for a second. Mode, species, and order. Mode. Mode is referring to how well something expresses its form. The extent to which potential is actualized would be another way to put that. So, there are human beings who express the form of humanity better than others. Right? And we could almost say that the difference is, and Aquinas isn't saying this, but I'm making that logical jump, that that difference is due to the presence of evil and corruption. Why? Because evil is the privation of something. It is what prevents us from fully living up to our form as it ought to be. So therefore we could say that Mother Teresa represents the form of humanity better than Joseph Stalin did. Okay? Species, something substantial form, so basically, as opposed to its accidental form. So humanity is a species. Yeah. Order, the natural being and end of a thing. So something well ordered is moving towards its end as a creature in the way that it is intended to according to its form. So mode, species, and order. So whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Our objections, we have several of them. Mode, species, and order belong to the nature of being. Being and goodness differ logically. We saw that in Article 2. Therefore, they do not belong to goodness. Mode, species, and order are themselves good. If goodness has them, then every mode, species, and order would have its own mode, species, and order, and that would extend on into infinity and be a logical absurdity. Evil is the privation of mode, species, and order, but evil is not the absence of all goodness. In other words, something can be evil and still have mode, species, and order. That which is good cannot be called evil, and we can speak of an evil mode, species, or order. And finally, mode, species, and order are caused by weight, number, and measure. Not every good thing has weight, number, and measure, and I believe Aquinas is referring to something in Augustine's writings where Augustine ties mode, species, and order to weight, number, and measure. And I'm afraid I can't give you a lot more info than that. We'll have to maybe look up that reference in Augustine sometime. Argument from authority. Augustine tells us that the essence of goodness is a mode, species, and order. Argument. Goodness is a perfection. All right, we've seen that at the beginning of this article. Okay, especially when we tie perfection to actuality, actuality to being, being to goodness. So goodness is a perfection. Every perfection has a form since perfection is tied to existence. Article 1. In other words, since perfection is actualization, it has to be related to a form. Form proportions its principles according to mode. In other words, how good something is how well you have the principles of the form. Form is signified by species. Number is a part of species, and we tied number to order. Hence, goodness includes mode, species, and order. I'll be really honest here. I'm a little in the dark about what exactly Aquinas is saying here, because I haven't read that section in Augustine and didn't have time to go look that up. I think that what he is trying to say is that if we look at those things, mode, species, and order, they're directly tied to what extent a thing has goodness. A thing has goodness to the extent that it, through its mode, it represents its form. Through its species, it has a fully actualized substantial form, and according to its order, it is directed towards its natural end. I think that's what it's saying. If you think I'm missing something, which I likely am, please don't hesitate to point that out in the comments or Facebook page or whatever. Okay. Objections answered. These three belong to being insofar as being is perfection, and that leads us back to goodness. So, enough with objection 1. 2, mode, species, and order are said to be good, not because they are good in themselves, but because through them things are called good. Okay, so I think that is what he's getting at here. That according to something's mode, species, and order, we can call it good or not good. Alright, evil does not remove every mode, species, and order, but only that relative to the good it deprives. Remember we talked about substantive being and relative being when we were equating being and goodness. We saw that in the first 3 articles. You can see the last video for that. That's what we're discussing here. 4, mode, species, and order are called evil, not because they are properly evil, i.e. the privation of goodness or being, but because they exist in a way they should not to a lesser extent than they should. Okay, so again, this is talking about gradation in something. So if we said that Joseph Stalin has an evil mode, species, and order, it's not because his mode, species, and order as a human being are evil. He has an evil version of them. It's because he lacks mode, species, and order of a human being to the extent that he should, to the extent that he should, in order to be called a good person. And we contrast that to like Mother Teresa again, where she has a greater gradation than would Stalin. Okay. Reply to 5, that not every good thing has weight, number, and measure, and they're referring to substances like light, which would lack number, measure, and weight. It doesn't lack it absolutely, but we say that it lacks, weight. You can't weigh a beam of light, but really, in a philosophical sense, we would say it does have those things. It's just that in the way we speak about them, and it seems it doesn't lack them absolutely, but we speak about things in comparison to corporeal beings, physical beings like you and me. So it's easy to tell that I have weight, way too easy to tell, and it's a lot and a beam of light, the light coming from the light bulbs behind me. In my office here, it's more difficult to tell that they have weight, measure, and number, but they do, even though if it's not 100% obvious. All right, finally, Article 6, whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. Objections. Aristotle tells us goodness is divided by the 10 categories. See the entry in the article in the dictionary on genus for more on that. Or do a little Googling. Virtue, use, and pleasantness are only contained in one of the categories. Divisions are made by opposites, but these 3 things are not opposite. These 3 are really the same thing, since virtuousness is pleasing and useful. Argument. St. Ambrose begs to differ. He says these are the divisions of goodness. Our argument. Goodness is the end of a desire. Again, we saw that back in Article 1. The means by which this end is achieved is called usefulness. The end in and of itself is called virtue. The rest or satisfaction achieved in reaching that end is called pleasure. So, to go back to our term we started today with, we could almost say that virtue, use, and pleasure are 3 aspects of goodness. I'm not saying that's what Aquinas is saying, but that's how it makes sense to me. Objections answered. Number 1, the division into 10 categories is true insofar as goodness is identical with being, but not when we consider goodness logically separate from being, which we saw back in the first couple articles of this question, is what we do when we are considering these mentally rather than actually. Reply to 2, these divisions are not opposite things but opposite aspects. Oh, so I was on the right track there. That's always encouraging. Each is desired for its own sake. And then 3, this division is an analogical division. Okay, so which makes sense because they're aspects. So if they were really 3 opposite things, then objection 3 would be confirmed. But because we're saying no, they're opposite aspects, then we're totally fine with objection 3 because they're 3 aspects of the same thing, and therefore it becomes an analogical division. All right, good stuff. So that's Articles 4 through 6. So there you have it. Question 5 done. This was a complicated one. I don't know about you guys. I certainly found myself struggling at times in this one to really grasp it. Hopefully these videos have been helpful. At least preparing them has been helpful for me in a difficult and dense question. And we'll move on to the final part of the discussion of the perfection of God in question 6 on the goodness of God. I'll be back with you in a couple days with that one. Until then, enjoy reading the Summa, and as always, focus on key terms, big ideas. You'll be just fine. All right, I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.